The Battle of Stalingrad is known as one of the most pivotal actions of World War II. It was also the deadliest battle in the history of warfare.
If you had to pick the most important battle of the Second World War, Stalingrad stands at the top.
More than 1 million lives were lost in 7 months of unrelenting fighting, and the eventual German defeat destroyed Hitler's dream of commanding a global empire.
Everybody thought that's the beginning of the end. It sent shockwaves through Germany.
For decades after the war, the battle was seen as a defining victory for a cunning Joseph Stalin, whose military strategy stalled the relentless German advance. The offensive was called Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history. Over 4 million Axis soldiers poured into Soviet territory. Operation Blue was intended to encircle and destroy the entire Red Army in southern Russia. That task fell upon German Army Group South. Hitler divided South into 2 armies. Army Group A was ordered to seize the Caucasus oil fields after Army Group B moved eastward to secure the Volga River. The drive to the Volga would be led by the German 6th Army, which Hitler had declared could storm the heavens. The build-up of Operation Blue was massive. In the spring of 1942, 68 divisions, 3,000 tanks, and the largest air force of its day began assembling in southern Ukraine. One of the men who was deployed outside the city of Kharkov was 6th Army Lieutenant Wigand Wuster. He had fought on the Western Front and was confident that the Nazis would be victorious.
As we had unloaded and marched into the city, the German soldiers said, "Don't be so proud, don't boast so much. Within a few days, you will be much quieter."
Wuster's fellow soldiers were right. The Eastern Front would not fall as easily as the West. Operation Blue was proceeding as planned, and what was left of Stalin's Red Army was being pushed steadily eastward. By early July, a jubilant Adolf Hitler proclaimed the Russian is finished. Anticipating the pending collapse of the Soviet Union, Hitler modified Operation Blue. First, he ordered the 6th Army to seize Stalin's namesake, the city of Stalingrad. The rest of Army Group B was split off to take the Caucasus, while a major portion of Army Group A was sent north to attack Leningrad. Hitler's confidence was premature.
And next day, Germans start this offensive on the both sides. They encircled 500,000 of the soldiers, and they lost everything.
To the south, Stalin's offensive on the Crimea Peninsula also ended in disaster. The Red Army attack was no match for Nazi General Erich von Manstein. Von Manstein was a hero in Germany for his work in the West. He was the commander of the 11th Army, which had steamrolled across France in a matter of weeks. He had little trouble repelling the Russian attack. On September the 13th, 1942, the 6th Army finally attacked en force. The battle for the city was on.
In essence, Stalingrad becomes a giant meat grinder, into which 6th Army initially commits 1/3 of its force, early September. By late November, it'll in fact commit its entire army.
And they fought against everything, in each basement, in each flat, in the apartment buildings. And you can have on one stage it was Germans, then Soviets, then Germans, then Soviets.
The Soviets were holding on, just playing for time, because north and south of the city, Red Army reinforcements were preparing to launch another major attack.
The Germans are trying against time, fighting Soviet will to squeeze out destroy those final Soviet pockets of resistance. They will never do so because on the morning of 19 November, German troops in the city of Stalingrad can now hear distant guns to the northwest and to the south. Those guns are announcing the opening of a Soviet counteroffensive.
Operation Uranus was the Soviet effort to close the gap, to conduct two massive pincers, one from the north and one to the south. The Soviets had done their intelligence. They knew where the German lines were weak, and they penetrated.
Over 1 million Red Army soldiers converged on the German troops. 3 days later, the Soviet pincers closed near the city of Kalash, trapping over 270,000 men. For the Germans, one hope remained. The High Command turned to Field Marshal von Manstein, whom Hitler had previously sent north to Leningrad. Now he was asked to head back south and scrap together a rescue operation. On the morning of December the 12th, the 6th Army heard the distant sounds of battle as Manstein's men approached. But the Field Marshal, whose battle plan had conquered most of Western Europe, could not break through the Soviet ring. As the guns of Manstein's relief force faded into silence, reality set in for the encircled 6th Army. The Soviets began their final assault with the largest artillery barrage in history. The Germans were on their last legs. Paulus defied his Führer and walked into captivity. The battle for Stalingrad was effectively over. 1,000 miles away in Germany, the unthinkable news that the fabled 6th Army had fallen sent shockwaves through the country.
Throughout Germany, once news of the defeat at Stalingrad was announced to the German people, the hundreds of thousands of German families that had soldiers engaged in the battle, they knew what that meant. They knew that they had lost their son, they had lost their husband, that he was not coming home. In a way that no other battle or campaign had touched all of Germany at once on such a vast scale.
The battle for Stalingrad lasted more than 7 months. It resulted in more than 750,000 Soviet casualties and more than 850,000 from the Axis soldiers. Of the 500,000 civilians who had once populated the city, only 1,500 remained. It was the winter of 1943, and while victory in Europe would not be official for more than 2 years, the inexorable German slide into defeat had begun. The Soviets defended Stalingrad, and within 26 months put Berlin under siege. If the Soviets had not turned the Nazis back at Stalingrad, the war might have had a very different end.
The impact of the Battle of Stalingrad on the course and outcome of World War II, and in particular the Soviet-German portion of the war, is fundamental. It is fundamental because the Battle of Stalingrad clearly indicated to all involved that Germany was going to lose the war.
For 6 months, the Germans had been fighting the Red Army for control of the Soviet city of Stalingrad. By December, The Soviets had surrounded the German troops and severed their supply lines. At home, Germans were told that their soldiers would rather die than surrender.
At the moment, heroic battles are taking place near Stalingrad. Our 6th Army is surrounded there. Will they have time to shoot themselves at the last moment?
On Christmas Day alone, 1,280 German soldiers died in Stalingrad. 5 weeks later, Germans heard this broadcast.
Der Kampf um Stalingrad ist zu Ende. Ihrem Fahneneid getreu ist die 6. Armee der Übermacht des Feindes und der Ungunst der Verhältnisse erlegen.
In truth, 91,000 German soldiers had surrendered against Hitler's orders. 86,000 of these men would die, and the rest would not return to Germany until 1955. After Stalingrad, the Germans began to doubt the Nazis' promise of total victory. Only a few suspected their true fate: total defeat.
Last year, when Russia commemorated the 65th anniversary of Victory Day, a Russian research center found that most Russians believe that the Red Army, the Soviet Union, could have defeated Hitler without Western assistance. As a historian, do you think it's hubris on part of the Russians?
No, I don't think it's hubris. I think it's true. The Soviet Union could have defeated Nazi Germany on its own. Well, so yes, the Soviet Union didn't ultimately need its allies to win the war. Most people globally, if they know about the war at all, would accept that it was primarily the Soviet Union that won the Second World War, made the greatest sacrifices, was the greatest victor of the war.